Hello, today I'm going to take you through the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. It's a very simple form to use, and we're going to want to make sure that we first of all do agency and have agency disclosure signed before we actually execute this listing agreement. Line one simply is the date, and you can use the little calendar if you're using .loop. We want to get the property address in. Um, Very easy to do. And then the full legal description. The full legal description is going to be required in order to make sure that we have a legally binding contract. Lori will send it back if you don't have it correct. Sellers, if it is two husband and wife, both sellers have to go in these lines. Sometimes I get the question if somebody bought the house and it is in their name, the loan is in their name, but then gets married, do both parties have to be on the listing agreement? And the answer is yes. In North Dakota, if you are married, it takes two signatures in order to sell the homestead property. So both people would go on there. And then for broker, we're going to put the brokerage name, the list price, and then it's important to know that the contract start date is the date that we have to go off of when submitting it into MLS. In Fargo, we have 24 hours from whatever date is put here to get that over to the board office. And then notice here that it says 11:59 p.m. So midnight on the date that is put there is when it will expire. Make sure that you're putting the property that is included, that is intended to stay. Common is washer and dryer. Make sure that you put the refrigerator in there. Refrigerators are considered to be personal property. Um, Whoops, I spelled that wrong. So we're just going to go refrig. And then anything that is excluded, this is our time to make sure that that gets in there as well. So let's just say maybe they want to keep their window coverings. Internet and electronic advertising permitted to market the property, including the property address. By checking yes, the sellers are agreeing to allow their address to go into the IDX feed, which will feed to hundreds of websites. If they check no, it means that they do not want their property address out and made available to the public. So make sure you have the conversation with them as to what that means to them. Sign permitted on the property, lockbox permitted on the property, and then we have to disclose if the seller has any sort of contract with a power company, fuel tank rental, or a water softener. I don't like to leave any lines left open, so I can put NA in that one. Home protection plan. Sometimes the sellers are going to want to offer an incentive, and we'll provide a home protection plan right on the front end of it. If they don't plan on doing that, we're going to check will not. And then notice as the date of this contract, seller has or has not received notice from any municipality, government agency, or homeowners association about the property. Seller agrees to inform the broker of any notice received about the property during the duration of this agreement. This means anything that they get from the city or county that suggests that there will be some sort of improvement project that seller is going to be financially responsible for. The buyer has the right to know that there could be future expenses being placed on that property, or property that may be lost due to easement. So have the conversation with your sellers that that is their responsibility to make sure that they disclose that. If there is any sort of well or subsurface treatment systems, this must be disclosed. And if you are checking yes, we're going to have additional documentation in, which is the system disclosure forms. This is a time, lines 29 through 48, that we can kind of go through what the seller's duties are and what they understand to, what they need to understand in regards to the contract. Their duties include cooperating with the broker and selling the property. Common with divorce situations is you will have one side kind of not cooperate. Um, with the other side, we want to make sure that they understand that they have to give us cooperation when listing that property. They're also going to tell us about any sort of inquiries received on the property. They're going to be able to provide and pay for any inspections and reports if it is required by a governing authority. Provide homeowners association documents if applicable. So if you are getting ready to sell a condo, make sure that you have all of that documentation gathered. The buyer needs to give an updated abstract of title, owner's duplicate certificate of title, registered property abstract, or a owner's title insurance on the property. The seller is also going to, per line 36, have all the appliances, heating, air conditioning, wiring, and plumbing on the property in working order on the date of the closing. If there is an exception, it's going to go in this line. If there's not, you're just going to write in NA. Also on line 38, they're saying that they're going to remain responsible for security, maintenance, utilities, and insurance while the seller owns the property. They're going to secure and conceal any valuable personal property during the property showings or open houses. Make sure that you let them know that if they have prescription medications, this should be hidden, taken away, locked up. iPads, cell phones, any of those small electronics should be locked up or put away. And of course, guns should be secured. Line 40, seller understands that the broker intends to rely on the accuracy of the information that the seller furnishes. Seller agrees to hold the broker harmless and defend the broker for any costs, expenses, or damages, including attorney's fees incurred by the broker as a result of the seller withholding information from the broker or as a result of giving broker any information which is incorrect. Basically, what line 41 through 43 is saying is that we are not going to be held legally liable if the seller chooses not to share information with us. It is their responsibility to provide us with accurate information. Line 44 is stating that the broker is a member of the multiple listing service and that the broker will give information to the MLS concerning the property. Seller will notify broker of relevant information important to the sale of the property, and when that property is sold, broker will notify MLS and member realtors of the price and terms of the sale. So we just need to let the seller know that we will be putting this listing into our MLS services. Line 47, this document shall serve as seller's written notice granting broker permission to obtain financing information. Sometimes we need to get mortgage balances, interest rates, payoff, or assumption figures regarding any existing financing on this property. And then make sure on line 49 that seller or sellers initial and date this page. Then we go on to line 51, and this is where we start to address brokers' compensation. The compensation rate for the sale, lease, rental, or management of real property shall be determined between each individual real estate broker and its clients. The law states that all commissions are negotiable, and it clearly states that right here as well. Seller hereby authorizes the broker to market the property and to share the broker's compensation with cooperating brokers. All listing commissions are earned by the listing broker. So if you're going to take that listing for 6%, all 6% of that commission will go to you if you find the buyer. There is no cooperating broker at that point. So all listing commission is earned by the listing agent or listing broker, and then you agree to share it with the buyer's agent. So if you're giving a buyer's agent 3%, that 3% is going to go into line 55. If you are agreeing to share a commission with a non-agent, meaning outside of our MLS, maybe you want to give them less, which is 2%, or maybe they are facilitating for their buyers, in which you would maybe want to offer them less as well. And then any other conditions are going to go into lines 55 and 56. Sometimes you'll have a seller ask, if you sell this property and have the buyer, will you take less commission? And that is something you could write in here. Let's say that you wanted to take 5% if listing agent procures buyer. Down to line 61, this is what is called our broker's protection clause. Usually we see 30, 60, 90, or 120 days here. For the sake of this, we're going to put 90 days. If within 90 days after the end of this contract, the seller sells or agrees to sell the property to anyone who, during the contract, made inquiry of the seller, and the seller did not tell the broker about it, or made affirmative showings of interest in the property, or was physically shown the property by the broker after the expiration of this contract, seller understands no compensation will be due to the broker if the seller signs another valid listing contract under which the seller is obligated to pay compensation to another licensed real estate broker. So what this broker protection clause is, on line 61 through 66, it's just stating that if I have you under contract, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and somebody comes forth during our contract, makes an inquiry about the property, and then it expires and comes back to purchase the property, and it is not relisted with anybody else, I can um, collect my commission because that interest was made during the time of the listing. Now, if it expires and gets relisted with somebody else, the broker protection clause is no longer valid. We go on to 67 through 70. This is the multiple offer disclosure. We have the form that you can use to educate the sellers on what it looks like to be in multiple offers. And here's where we have to ask them to choose how they would like us to handle it, either between 69, where we agree that the listing agent should attempt to inform the agents, or that they do not want the listing agents to disclose the multiple offer situation. This is a really important item to note, and why it's so important to know what your market is doing, because the difference between a buyer's market and a seller's market is going to play how you want to address lines 69 and 70. Lines 71 through 80, we don't tell our sellers where they need to close the properties. Sometimes they will have attorneys, or it'll be involved in an estate, or there'll be other reasons that they want to choose their closing company. This is now where we have the discussion on that, and then they choose if they want us as the agent brokerage to handle it, or if they're going to arrange for it on their own. Appointed agency, we are an appointed agency brokerage company. So as you, the listing agent, when you take your listings, you're going to be putting your name as the appointed agent. And then the seller is either going to accept you as the appointed agent or reject you. This is also a spot where your signature is going to go, and the sellers have to understand what appointed agency means. That's why it's so important that you go through your agency disclosure prior to you actually taking and going through this listing agreement with your sellers. And then, of course, consent for communication simply means that they're giving us authorization to contact be contacted by mail, phone, fax, email, or other means of communication during the duration of this agreement. Make sure that you ask your sellers how they prefer to be communicated with, and then make sure that they're okay with you texting them, because so many of us are now using texting as a form of primary communication, and every now and then you're going to have a seller that's not okay with that. dual agency. It's in the state of North Dakota and at our office. If you are working with both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, you are going to be in dual agency. Now, if our broker or if our brokerage has the buyer and you have the seller, you're going to be in an appointed agency situation. However, there's going to be those times when you may procure the buyer as well. So we're going to ask the seller to agree to be in a dual agency situation. If they do not agree to either dual agency or go back to appointed agency, if they reject either of those, which is on line 96 or line 114, if they reject and say no, then we're not going to be able to bring any of our buyers that are represented by Keller Williams into their property. So it's important that they do agree so that they can get the most exposure as possible. If not a citizen of the United States, we're going to have to put what the situation is on this line. And then if you run into this situation, I'm going to ask that you give me a call so I can kind of guide you and direct you as to what you need to do, because there are IRS reporting requirements when it comes to a non-citizen. Non-discrimination, lines 123 through 126, is just stating that once a seller hires a brokerage company, we are not allowed to discriminate under law any buyers or protected classes. And then we've got the foreign investment and real estate property tax. And if they are not a foreign person, they're going to click on the is not. And here again, if they are a foreign person, I'm going to ask that you give me a call so I can kind of guide and direct you as to how to handle that. And then other conditions, common that we see here, if there's a stop, which means subject to owner's purchase, that's going to go in on line 146. Or sometimes we'll see a something that says seller has the right to terminate this contract with written notice. Whatever it is that you choose for your fire me clause, if you have one, should go into line 146. And then that's it. That's all we need to do. It gets saved, sent out for signatures, and then hopefully you'll get it loaded right up into .loop. Remember, you have 7 days from the final acceptance date to get it into a loop.